Hi, and welcome to a presentation on job interviews. You're going to be doing a job interview with me via Skype, and so you need to be prepared, as you should be prepared for every job interview that you're going to have going forward in your life. So let's learn a little bit about that. First of all, before you go into an interview, you have to think ahead. Here are the stages of preparation. Before the interview, think about what kinds of questions you're going to get asked and be ready with certain kinds of answers for each of those typical questions. You're always going to get asked questions that are a little bit different than you're expecting, but you should have basics ready to go. Bring the right stuff with you, pick the right outfit. Those are crucial things for before the interview. During the interview itself, you want to make sure you shake hands at the beginning and then at the end. You have to be able to handle the questions you're going to get, and you should be prepared to ask your own questions. After the interview, you do a follow-up, which means that you send in an email saying thank you for the interview. You can also use regular mail, but these days, email is most common. Before the interview, you need to do a little research to figure out about the job that you're applying for so that you come in well prepared. Be prepared for questions. There are certain kind that they always have, like tell me a little bit about yourself. And that can be a kind of question that trips you up. So you think, God, there are lots of different things I could tell you. But what they're really looking for is something about yourself that relates to that kind of job. So if somebody asks me, oh, you're applying for a job to be a professor at a different school, and then they ask me, oh, tell me a little bit about yourself, and I tell them about how I like to go running on the weekends, that's obviously not the right thing. I need to talk about my past experience that relates to that job. Think about what you want to say. Here are some typical interview questions. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work here? And that one, the best way to answer it is to figure out what they mean by here. Like, what's this job actually like? So if you say, well, I want to work here at this bank instead of the other bank because I know you have more training programs for your employees and I'm really interested in moving up and becoming a better employee. Something like that tells them that you've done some research to find out about the other types of jobs and that you are specifically interested in working there, as opposed to, I just need a job somewhere, anywhere, give me a job, please. They will ask, why did you leave your last job? Especially if you had a difficult time leaving a last job, if you got fired or there was some kind of personal conflict. The best thing to do is find a way to discuss that so that it doesn't trip you up, so that you don't end up saying something that makes you sound like a difficult employee or makes it sound like you hated your previous job. So you have to work on that. But that's a question that often gets asked, so just be ready with a good answer. What are your best skills? What are your weaknesses? Some people don't feel comfortable talking about their strengths, but you have to be ready to talk about your strengths and ready to mention a weakness that doesn't make you look like a bad employee. So one of the things that people often say in terms of their weaknesses, they are so focused on details and attention to detail that sometimes that can slow them down. That's the kind of weakness that actually makes you look like a good employee. They will ask you, do you prefer to work alone or in groups? And depending on the job, you'll probably end up doing both at some times. But just answer that as honestly as possible. And what are your career goals? Particularly if you're studying towards one thing, but you're applying for a job in something else, you're going to need to be able to explain that a little bit in a job interview. What salary are you expecting? You have to do your research ahead of time to know what a rough salary for that job would be. And don't sell yourself short. Go in and make sure that you ask for a reasonable salary for that kind of job. Here's some things you should bring: notepad and pens, extra resumes, just in case other people show up for the interview who would like an extra copy of your resume, references, which is a list of people who you've worked with in the past, or professors who can speak to your qualifications and credentials. This shouldn't be a family member or friend. Also, a list of questions that you'd like to ask them about the job, because usually at the end they say, do you have any questions for me? So you have to have those questions ready. Handbag, briefcase, whatever, to carry all your stuff in. And here are some things not to bring. Don't chew gum, right? Maybe pop a breath mint in the car before you get there or the bus, but no gum. Don't bring food or drinks. If they offer you a drink, water, not coffee. You don't need to be agitated and jittery. Definitely go alone. Don't bring a family member or friend. You have to pick the right outfit. Now, in my life, I never thought as an English professor I'd be talking to you about your clothes. I have no right to tell you anything about what to wear, except I'd like you to get a good job. And the best way to do that is to know what they're expecting. The bottom line is figure out what kind of job it is and then dress slightly more formal than that type of job. So if the job you're applying for is at a mechanic's office or as a mechanic, Obviously, mechanics are getting dirty all day long, so they're not going to wear anything formal to work. Then you can afford to go in wearing, regular slacks, not jeans, not sweats, and a button-down shirt. You don't need to go fancy. But if you're applying for a job as maybe an administrative assistant at a local pharmaceutical company, you're going to want to go in looking a little more formal. So just balance it with what the job is. But in general, when you pick your clothes, make sure that they're pretty conservative, pretty bland, and that they are something that you feel good in. Whatever your shape or size is, what you're wearing should fit. Here are some standard men's apparel. Leather shoes, pants with a belt, with the shirt tucked in, tie. The shirt needs to be a button down. Obviously, you're going to go a little more formal if you're applying for a more formal type job, a little bit less formal. But the rule of thumb, slightly more formal than the job you're applying for. When you go in for the interview, you're going to look a little better than you would if you get that job every single day. Does that make sense? And so if you don't own these kinds of clothes, that's okay. Many people don't. But go to the local Salvation Army. They always have these types of clothes for very inexpensive. There's no need for you to shell out. If you get the job, go and get some good clothes. Here's some standard women's apparel. Obviously, depending on the kind of job that you're applying for, you're going to know, again, what level you want to calibrate your outfit for. But be sure to be as modest as possible. If you have religious dress or anything that you wear on a regular basis that you have to wear, don't change any of that. You wouldn't. But for everybody else, make sure that your skirt, if you're wearing a skirt, is knee length or longer, that your slacks are fitted, and that you look appropriate. Makeup and jewelry should be barely noticeable. Your hair needs to be out of your face. People want to see your face when they're hiring you. I know it seems obvious, but here are some things not to wear. I used to do in my in-class interviews with students, I'd have them come in and I would just say, dress formal. And I got a lot of different ideas about what dress formal meant. So this is meant to be funny, but it's also true. Just make sure that you're wearing what's appropriate. Here's some other silly things that obviously avoid wearing. Okay, you're dressed. Now, think about the different kinds of interviews. You need to know that there are different types of interviews you might get called for. One is a screening interview. Then there's a telephone interview, stress interview, a one-on-one interview, and a group interview. So let's look at each of those one by one. The first one is a screening interview. In a screening interview, the only thing they're looking for is to figure out if there's any inconsistency with your resume. The next one is a stress interview. For anybody who's applying for an emergency services, medical job, anything in fire science or corrections or police, anything like that, you may very well be subjected to a stress interview. The hard part about a stress interview is they don't tell you that that's the kind of interview you're going to have before you get there. The whole point is to kind of try and psych you out and see how you handle stress. So they may have people that may make you wait around for an extra long period of time. They might be very confrontational or sarcastic in the way they ask their questions. They might The one-on-one interview is by far the most common type, and it's the one that you should be most prepared for. Your job in this is to establish rapport with the person and demonstrate your qualifications and your personality and show that you're a good fit for the job. At the beginning of an interview, especially one-on-one, you're going to shake hands. You're also going to shake hands at the end. You should use a firm handshake and make eye contact when you do it. Don't hold on too long. That will be awkward. But also don't give people sort of the limp lettuce handshake that makes people feel anxious. Obviously, you want to be polite. Turn off cell phone. Don't use your slang. Use your best English. Speak as clearly and loudly as possible, loudly enough to be heard. Don't whisper. Sometimes people, if they're not feeling very confident, if they're not a first language speaker for English, will speak very softly. Please just speak up. If you don't understand something, you should be comfortable asking somebody to repeat it or explain it in more detail. And you can certainly pause before responding to a question to actually think about your response so that you don't just say something that doesn't really answer the question. They're going to ask you at the end if you have any questions of your own. And even if they don't, you should be prepared to ask a few questions. You may not get to ask all of them, but I always think it's a good rule of thumb to have 5 questions ready to go. You don't want to ask questions that are like, so what's your drug policy? Or, how much sick time do I get if I stay here? Right? Things that will set off warnings. The kinds of questions you're going to want to ask are things like, do you have any opportunities for advancement or on the job training? Things like that show that you're a little bit ambitious, that you want to know a little bit more about that position. Or if there's anything that came up earlier in the interview, they were asking you something about, working remotely or traveling, and you didn't know that the job was going to have a travel component, you could ask them to clarify. That's the perfect time. After every interview, you need to follow up. You are not done once you leave that room. Go home and write a brief note to thank them for their time. And if they asked you for anything, like, could you send us a copy of, I don't know, a transcript or a certificate? Okay, here's an important slide. Occasionally it happens, and it's happened to my students, which is why I've actually put this on here. You should know how to respond to inappropriate behavior that might occur to you in this kind of setting. And it makes no difference whether you're male or female. If there's any time when during a job interview or any job circumstance that you feel threatened, you need to leave immediately. You can make an excuse like needing to use the restroom or whatever, and then just don't go back. If an interviewer blocks the door, you should scream very loud. Don't start any physical aggression, but if you're grabbed or whatever, something like that, you should definitely fight back. And then you should report any kinds of physical or sexual assault to the authorities immediately, and record the date, time, anything like that. Again, it may seem overly cautious, but things like this do actually happen, and you should just be prepared. So I'm letting you know. So good luck with your job hunting, and I can't wait to read all of your resumes and cover letters and get a chance to interview you by Skype.